My name is Carol Spackman Moss. I live in Holiday and I taught at Olympus High for 33 years. I taught English and I decided to run for office 20 years ago. And I thought maybe I could win despite being a Democrat in a Republican district because I taught about 8,000 to 9,000 students. And I knew lots of other kids besides my students, and it worked. I was elected. I defeated a 10-year incumbent, and I've been in ever since. So my district, half of it's in Holiday and half is in Murray, where I also have a lot of former students. And so I tell you that because it really has been key, and I think Kathleen Riebe can say the same thing, that people look beyond my party because if they know you as a teacher and they respect you and they know your values, and education has always been the #1 issue for my constituents. So that's been a huge advantage. And I've worked on a lot of education issues, as you can imagine. Senator Riebe and I have co-sponsored some bills in the last few years since she's been in. We're a pretty good team, aren't we? And I've done a lot of other work on things like the opioid epidemic and mental health and jail and prison reform, but I've also done bills on bullying and funding for the IB program and exit survey that Representative or Senator Riebe and I did together that will gather data on why teachers are leaving all over the state, and data that we can really base decisions on about attracting, retaining teachers. And I started got funding for a program in Salt Lake District about teacher mentoring called Peer Assistance Review, that they've been very successful in being able to retain teachers because they get the kind of one-on-one mentoring that teachers really need in those early years. So I have 3 daughters, 2 stepsons, a husband, grandkids who are all in their teens or in college now. And I'm running for re-election for my 11th time. So that's me.
Thank you so much. Do you want to go next, Kathleen?
Sure. My name is Kathleen Riebe, and I'm a school teacher in Granite School District. Oh, I like that background.
Yeah, I do too.
And I ran for the school board in 2016. I never ever aspired to be a politician or to have a career in politics, but I got really frustrated when I went to my meetings and they weren't responsive to what we were asking them to do. And I realized that the only way to change things is by becoming involved. And it naturally progressed as I started to get more involved and more passionate I felt about my community. And as a teacher, you see the wide range of the kids and the parents and the struggles that everyone has across the whole entire, economic spectrum. And there's not one thing that's unique to any demographic. Every family is struggling. Every family has different struggles, and every family needs to be supported. And I think that our schools, in the past used to be a place where you really felt comfortable and were a center of your community. And I think that that's something that we should start to get back to, and we should start to really look within our own house and our communities. And that's why I ran for the Senate after I was on the state school board, because I realized that interpreting the laws that came down really wasn't helping as much as helping to create those laws. So I've worked with Carol Spackman Moss, I've worked across the aisle, and I've actually worked in a lot of different areas that I really didn't understand until I realized that education touches everything. And so people like, how were you prepared for these positions? I said, your schools deal with their housing, your schools deal with everything, roads and traffic and RDAs and tax increments. And so if you're involved in your school, you're involved in every part of your community. So it's been a great run, and I've enjoyed it tremendously, and I've liked getting to know my community, and that's why I'm running again.
Jay, do you want to go ahead?
My name is Jay Blain. My background is that I spent 20 years as a high school teacher, teaching math and computer science and computer technology. Then I went to work for the Utah Education Association. I do many different have many different duties there. One of them is working with the legislature. I specialize in school finance, tax policy, retirement issues, things like that. I also work in my job working with collective bargaining around the state, and working with our retired organization as well. But tonight I'm actually here. I was asked, as my role as the chair of the Democratic Party Education Caucus as well. And we have that caucus within the Democratic Party for anyone who is involved with education or has a passion for education. And we, when we have the organizing conventions and the nominating conventions, we have the candidates come and express their views on education. And then we look to see who we want to support those candidates as well. So I wear many hats, but I've been in education all my life. Both my parents were educators, were teachers as well. And I've been just involved from the get-go in the association as well. And I was on a call yesterday and one of our speakers was Representative Johanna Hayes from Connecticut. Fantastic representative. She had a quote that I liked, and it's the one it hit home to me, that teaching is the only profession that I love that loved me back. So that's what I'll just end with on the introduction here.
Okay, thank you guys. Why do you guys think it's important that we get young people involved and excited about education and stuff, even though we aren't seeing the direct effects because we're, in college and you don't always see? I'm not wording this the best, but yeah. Why do you think it's important for young people to be involved with local elections and policies?
I think that our young people need to get involved. I mean, we were just talking about housing in Grantsville, and the opportunities are not available for you. And people like me who have a house and already have kids in school, we're making policies for you. And what I need isn't what you need. And so those policies are benefiting me. And, although I'm understanding more, and we are trying to understand more, that our demographics have changed and we don't have the opportunities we have anymore. You, as the next generation, need to lay the groundwork for what you want to see your community look like. Just like we were talking about those homes, and we were talking about, high density housing. I mean, I'd much prefer to have a mindset of high density housing and more green space than have sprawl going on. And that's something that I would look forward to in the future. But unless you're a part of the process, you can't advocate for that and you can't change it. I mean, showing up to your local meetings is good, but actually being involved is going to help more.
I would say, and I've heard Senator Riebe say this a lot, how important it is for people to pay attention to the local elections, not only your city elections, but specifically your school board elections, and attend school board meetings. And this year, a former student of mine wanted to get involved in, she called me last year, I want to get involved in politics. I have 4 kids in school from elementary through high school. She had been a teacher for 10 years and they moved out of state, and she came back, and I encouraged her to run for the school board. And so she did, and she had a big primary. There were 4 of them, and I walked for her. I mentored her. I gave her ideas about signs and brochures, and she's just done a fabulous job. She came out 2,500 votes ahead of the next person in a 4-way primary, so she has a really good shot at it. But she sees how important it is, because her kids are in elementary, junior high, and high school, and how much she can contribute by being a strong board member. A lot of people run for school board unopposed. Lately, it's become competitive. That has so much to do. They decided what kind of school opening we'd have, right? We'd go full on, not the hybrid that teachers wanted. It was directly in contradiction to what teachers wanted, which they thought it would be safer to have half of them there at a time in high school. And the board just there were 500 teachers. My daughter teaches too in Granite. She's a high school English teacher too. 500 teachers were protesting outside the school district with signs, my daughter too. And I didn't want to be around crowds because of COVID, but it didn't make a difference. Did you see what I mean? I think there's one person on the school board who's a retired teacher, but I'm a little off topic here to say, do you know that we now have about 7 or 8 teachers out of 104 legislators? And education is half of our budget. You know, we need more teachers in there because they look to us, don't they, Jay? And say, is this good education policy? Republicans come to us all the time.
But not enough.
Not enough, but they do. They really do, you know, use us as a resource. So that's why I think it's really important that young people get involved in politics and work for candidates like you're doing, because boy, Betsy DeVos is the worst education secretary we have ever had in my lifetime.
I would just add that every day an elected official is making a decision that impacts you somewhere.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Somewhere, in some way, whether it has to do with your education, whether it has to do with your transportation, whether it has to do with, you know, where you can live, how you can live, whether you can have a plastic bag at the grocery store or something. A city council, you know, something, zoning. An elected official is making a decision that impacts your life probably every day. And people don't realize that. And so being involved in elections and politics is very important, no matter what your age, you know, and vote. Not enough young people even vote. That's another thing, you know, let alone being involved in the process, but come on, vote.
Right. We at the state legislature determine what your tuition is. I mean, in a sense, the colleges do, but we appropriate so much money. And then if we don't appropriate enough, they raise your tuition even higher. So, yeah.
What strain have you seen COVID putting on the education system?
Kathleen, you're in the classroom. You ought to take this.
Yeah, you know, right when it happened, we shut down our schools, and you know, our teachers are like, how do we get the grades out? How do we have accountability? And you know, I'm not a principal. I could be a principal. I chose to be a senator instead. But I said, you know, our kids are not worried about their grades, and our parents aren't worried about our grades. They're worried about, you know, feeding their kids. They're worrying about staying in their homes. They're worrying about their abuelas getting sick. And, you know, I mean, it was really scary. I live in Cottonwood Heights, but I go into South Salt Lake, which has, you know, at that time, a 20% infection rate. And so, you know, for them, this means everything. Like, it's not just being sick, it's being evicted, losing their jobs, being an essential worker and having to go to work, but school not being in session. And then as soon as we stopped going to school, we realized that no one's getting fed, no one's checking on these kids for child abuse. I was reading in the Washington Post last night that they think that we've gone back 25 years in these short few months in vaccinations and poverty, wage gap. And the problem is, it's not affecting the middle class, but it's grossly affecting the lowest income people. And so it's affecting education, because you can't have kids come to school and thrive if they're thinking about all these problems in our world. And so, you know, before all this media was coming at you at such high rates, you could actually protect your kids and insulate them. That doesn't happen anymore. Our kids know just as much as we know, sometimes more. I mean, they pay attention to everything. So our kids are very stressed out. They're very scared of the future. And I think that just providing a happy place for them to touch base and have soft landing is the most important thing for our kids right now.
You might have read this in the paper. It made national news that in the small town of Enterprise, Utah, the parents there were adamantly against wearing masks and having their kids have to wear them. And one of the girls in the high school talked to her or communicated with her social group and said, if we don't wear masks and we have an outbreak, they'll close our school down. There goes our senior year. So she organized those kids to all wear masks so they could have their school year. And I've heard from many teachers, we have closed Facebook groups where teachers are saying from elementary up to high school, better in elementary, those kids are wearing masks and not complaining. It's their parents that are making such a fuss because the kids desperately want to be in school. Wouldn't you say that, Kathleen?
The
Yes, I
strain,
would definitely say that.
the strain is also showing up on the workload of the teachers, which is always big. Where with the hybrid models, which are trying to be a good model, but when teachers have face-to-face students and online students, they're having to deal with two different types of teaching, which with sometimes with a little bit of extra time, but not enough. And therefore they are teaching during the day and then having to deal with online students as well. And this workload issue is becoming really difficult. That's what we're hearing from teachers. It has exacerbated and put a spotlight on what were already strains in our system. Teachers were hesitant to go back to face-to-face learning because we already had the largest class sizes in the country. And without the ability to do social distancing, teachers were nervous about it. All of the PPE didn't arrive on time. They were nervous about that. So they were, hesitant. But teachers wanted to be back with their students. They love their students. They love the interaction. They want to be face to face. They went back. They're really, really tired, even after just 2-3 weeks of school. And the strain is there. If they don't have if they don't follow the protocols now, where some of these high schools are getting close to meeting the regulations or the recommendations, and they don't follow them, I'm not sure what some of those teachers are going to do. They're facing a lot of strain on these regulations. They also have to do the additional duties of sanitizing at times, wiping down their desks in their classrooms, things like that. Just another thing on top of things. So there's, I think what you say is about the strain is just more on top of what they're already doing, and it highlighted our already scarcity model of funding in stretching us even thinner.
One of the things that my daughter was particularly stressed about, and still is, she has 38 students in one class, and she can only get 2 feet between the kids side by side, and they're close together front to back. And those same kids, and she has, great students, they're really motivated AP students, but they're playing football, they're on the cheerleading squad, they're doing all these outside activities without any kind of restriction. And so the likelihood of their getting COVID, I don't know if they've had any cases or not. I heard Olympus High, where I taught, is 3 students away from having to close. And you know what's happening in Utah County and Jordan. And so the teachers have, besides the work that Jay's talking about, they still have that same anxiety that, people are facing that have to go to work. And that is, what if they get it? And where are the substitutes? If your teacher's sick, where do you find substitutes? They're not available. They don't want to come in for the salary they make as a substitute and risk their lives.
Yeah, I just taught kindergarten all day the other day. It was kind of funny. And it's, as a teacher, the only grade everyone's afraid of is like 12th grade and kindergarten. Because you tell the kids, hey, go stand on the green square, and none of the kids know what green is. You're like, oh.
I love seniors. I love, that's my favorite.
Why do you think it's important that we are compensating our teachers and caregivers fairly?
Well, we know about teachers because the pool of qualified teachers, highly qualified teachers, increases as salaries go up. For example, my daughter teaches English and she's the department chair. So she and the principal hire teachers. So 5 years ago, they had 2 openings and they had 4 teachers apply. They picked 2 that they thought were the least bad. And then the salaries in Granite went up the next year, and this year they were 50,000. The starting salary 50,300 from just a few years ago. It was like 38,000. They had 3 openings. They had 27 applicants. So they hired 3 really good teachers. So I was telling some of my Republican colleagues, I said, you know, it's all about the free market. And they said, you sound like a Republican, Carol, but let's face it, you get more competition. Let me just say a word about caregiving. My mother was in an assisted living facility here in Salt Lake for 13 years. She's 95. She was quarantined, like they all were, in March, and she already was on hospice care. She's not got any ailments. She's just fading slowly. We couldn't see her for 3 months, and she was really, you know, declining rapidly. And those caregivers were wonderful to her. And they had such a risk. Nobody at their facility got COVID, but many others had 8 and 9. And they pay, some of those women have been there 15 years and they make about $12, $13 an hour, and CNAs, and the new ones make $9 an hour. And they're responsible for people's lives. And they're the ones that make them happy and say nice things to them and are very kind to them. So we moved my mother to my sister's just because we didn't want her to die alone. But the people in facilities like that, nursing homes, assisted living, they're putting their lives on the line, just like hospital workers are. And certainly those people at the low end, like CNAs, a lot of them are training to be nurses. They're kids your age. You know, they go to community college, a lot of them. They should be paid better. Big corporations are buying up these assisted living facilities. They're cash cows, you guys. And why I've told the director that. He said, well, we have such a turnover and da-da-da, they can't get the laundry straight. We have new people all the time. And I said, you should pay them better. I mean, they're responsible for the lives of our loved ones, your grandmothers and grandfathers.
And childcare is another situation.
It is,
well.
it is, yep.
Childcare is a crisis that just keeps ongoing. And one of the reasons people wanted schools open was childcare. And it's a default childcare for a lot of people. I mean, I'm telling the harsh truth here, but that people want schools open so that if they have to go to work, they have a place for their kids to go. And that's the way it is. But people, it's because quality, affordable childcare is difficult to find. And that's, you know, affordable childcare is almost is an oxymoron almost, because it doesn't exist really. And that's another thing that's been laid bare by the COVID pandemic, is the need for childcare out there and people looking for it and not being able to find it. And when essential workers were you know, having to go to work and trying to find a place for their kids to go, and the schools had been, you know, in soft closure in the spring, that was a major issue, major issue. So that's another thing that I think we talk about, educators, and that's, you know, been a shortage for quite a while now. And Representative Moss explained very good about, you know, assisted living centers, but childcare is another big issue as well.
So as we look, oh, sorry, Carol.
Go
I
ahead.
keep saying, if schools are the grease and the glue of our communities, then why aren't we funding them more? I mean, they say that our communities fell apart because our schools weren't open. Well, let's use that to our advantage. We're the grease and the glue of our communities. And the other part about our caregiving jobs, these jobs, care centers, some of these are our highest paying, low paying jobs. So if you're somebody that's coming out of low income lifestyles and you're trying to break into a higher income bracket, these are the jobs that you can actually have and you can actually build upon to create a better life for yourself. So they're the stepping stones for many people into the next level of employment. And so if we are going to make them so burdensome that they can't actually move forward in their life, they're just going to be dead-end jobs. And so in the past, when you looked at people who were aides in schools or nurses, nursing assistants, these were people that were aspiring to do something more with their lives. But now we're not paying a living wage and we're only trapping them in these jobs. So when we talk about pulling people up by their bootstraps, if we're not giving them a living wage at these jobs, we're cutting their bootstraps off. And so I think it's really important to understand that every level of these jobs we have in our society should be something that you can actually build upon.
I wanted to say that over decades, and I don't know how many, but schools have become responsible for more things than ever. When I think back to when I started teaching or when I was a kid, we didn't go into school. We didn't expect the schools to feed us, did we? Or to be daycare or have to after school programs. And what I think has happened is over time, the Republican Party has cut back that social safety net in so many ways. I mean, Granite District has mobile clinics that go around to the Title I schools and do vaccinations, and they do everything that families used to do, but families don't have the resources anymore. And I don't resent, I'm pleased that the schools have provided food for kids even when the schools were closed, and it's the right thing to do. But they are not funding schools to be everything to kids in every way that families used to be. And so I'm hoping that with the Biden-Harris presidency, that they'll look at those, give people insurance so everybody has access to health care and good child care, subsidized child care, so schools don't have to do everything anymore. That's really become, wouldn't you agree with me, Senator, and that schools, mental health counseling, social workers, nurses, we need all those things and we fight for funding, but it wasn't always necessary because people had resources to get those services. So let's hope that Biden and Harris have plans to improve access to all those things.
Cameron, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, sure. So first thing I wanted to ask is that if you're probably aware, the 2018 budget in Utah, we had a $1 billion surplus in the education fund. I want to ask why Congress has been so hesitant to appropriate more funds for school, specifically because we have the lowest per pupil funding for America. Can anyone answer that?
You mean the state legislature?
The state legislature, yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. I don't care. I mean, Jay, you're a money's guy. I think we could all.
Well, this is right up my alley. This is where I live
Yeah.
and breathe. There's been many reasons, I think. One is they always talk about, well, what happens when the economy, they're always putting money away for when the economy turns. Now, when the economy turned, they were hesitant to use it. So that was an interesting turn of events. Because then they say, well, we don't know how long this downturn's going to last, so we have to parcel it out. So that's another interesting turn. They'll say, well, it's a lot of what they do is they'll say, this is our projected amount that we think we're we're going to have. And then when money comes in over that, they'll say, well, this is above projection, so it's one-time money. So they'll say some of this surplus is one-time money. We can't spend it on ongoing expenses. So we can't put it into the budget as ongoing money. We can only put it in for one time. So we can't put it into things like, you know, money that'll go towards salaries or go towards ongoing operating expenses. And that kind of limits how much they can put in. Now, they'll keep saying, well, we increased the budget by the most ever, or we had the highest budget ever. Well, because the raw amount looks like that, that's almost true every year. So they pat themselves on the back by saying that. And they, you know, over the last, you know, decade, over the last 4 or 5 years, you know, they'll say we've increased education funding by $1 billion. Well, they have, but if you dig down deep, when we had the big recession at the end of the 2000s, we barely just got back this year to the point where we were before that hit. So, you know, they did a good job in building it up over the last, you know, 4 years or so, but it was just digging out of the hole that we were in before. So that was, you know, and inflation adjusted dollars, we were just back to where we were before. But regardless, I'm getting a little bit away from what your question was. I sort of answered it, I hope. They always want to put money away. A lot of the times they claim it's one-time money. You know, then there's this big push about accountability. Well, you know, we can't just throw all this money into education, because what would they do with it all? How would they be accountable for it? I see Carol smiling because she's heard this.
I've heard it so many times.
And things like that. And then they don't put it in what's called the weighted pupil unit or the general distribution area. They parcel it out into all these other little projects. And they'll come up with ways they think are better, because they think that, well, this will be more accountable, or we'll be able to control it better, because you know, we wouldn't want to let the districts or, you know, the people, actually boots on the ground people, decide how to spend it, because then, you know.
So
I'm sorry, I'm a little cynical sometimes about
I
this.
know. Oh, we all are.
So if you look at Senate Bill 3 from 2020, and you look at the long title, it talks about money appropriated in this bill. It says that the bill appropriates $657 million in operating and capital budgets for the fiscal year, including $155 million from the education fund. So it's kind of like they're creating this piggy bank that they can raid all the time, because we think that all this money is going in the education fund, and it's not. And it's going to where they think it's important. But the people of Utah want it to go to the kids. And so that is a frustration. And, you know, I do feel a little bit of the cynicism about, you know, the rainy day fund. We finally have used it all. And I'm thankful that it was there. But that's something that they hold over our head all the time. And when we shortchange our education, we're only shortchanging the future. And that's my frustration.
Well, I'll just point out to you that when the recession hit in 2008, the year before, Governor Huntsman had advocated for a 2% decrease in the income tax rate, and they call it a flat tax. They're a single rate tax. Well, that helped a lot of people, but it didn't help education. And because all income tax goes to education. So for the next 4 years, Utah got, first of all, it was several $100,000 less, and then it went up to, by the end of the 4 years, it was almost $500 million less in, or was it $500,000, Jay?
It was 400 million. 400 million.
Okay, it was almost $500 million. So this, think about this, guys. So those 4 years, they put no money into increased enrollment. 10 to 12,000 new students a year came into the Utah education system with not $1 going toward funding them. So do you know why we have huge class sizes? And as Jay said, we've never dug out of that. So there's never been enough money. They brag about how much they put in, but they've never caught up. So now they are not only funding enrollment growth, but they're guaranteeing that. By their way, we should tell you about the constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot.
Yeah, I was going to ask
Vote
about that.
no.
Constitutional Amendment G.
Gee,
Well,
do you want to say why?
I
Constitutional
love
Amendment
the way
G.
they word it, right? Do you love the way they word it?
Well,
Oh,
you may not like what I say about it, Carol, but
I'll tell you if I don't.
I need to
Well.
pop off to go pick up my daughter. She's at a function. So nice to meet you all. Please feel free to call me and email me at any time. Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Jay. Thanks,
Yeah,
Autumn.
bye,
Thank you
Kathleen.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
okay. Were you going to ask about that, Cameron? Or
Yes, the wording is very vague. What did you have to say about it?
well, there was a bill. So the history has been that since 1996, when the last constitutional amendment was made on this topic, all income tax is dedicated, corporate and individual income tax goes to education, both K-12 and higher ed. But the history of that has been really the will to fund public education has been by the leadership of the legislature. That has guaranteed a funding source, not a distribution. Like the previous question, Cameron, you said there's $1 billion surplus. Why didn't they put that money in education? If it's guaranteed if the constitutional guarantee is in there, why didn't it go there? And we gave you some reasons, and they have figured out ways to not put it there because their political will is not to put it there. Their political will is to fund transportation or to fund other things like that. And that's what has happened. So they made a couple of efforts at tax reform. They failed, okay, for various reasons. One was because they tried to put the food tax back on, and there's that made enough people mad that they signed petitions, and that failed. And so during the last session, general session, they came up with this grand compromise that they would say, okay, if you'll agree to our constitutional amendment, we will come up with a distribution method that will guarantee distributing money to education and not just a revenue source. And that is what we ended up with going forward. And when we've looked at the history of the constitutional guarantee or the constitutional amendment, for UEA, the pros outweigh the cons here. And we understand that and so we have this support for Constitutional Amendment G because we understand that the funding of education will always be up to the political will of the leadership of the legislature. And that Constitutional Amendment G says that the income tax can go to other places than education, but it became clear through income tax or through tax reform that they had ways of moving that money regardless, and they showed us those ways. They told us those ways that they can do it without changing the Constitution, regardless. So that's my explanation of it. That's our explanation of it anyway.
Well, one thing that you didn't mention, Jay, that I think is important is that income tax revenue goes to education historically, but everything else is funded, what they call the general fund, through sales tax and what other, like, I don't know, other kinds of taxes, but mainly sales tax. So what has grown over the years? The income tax, sales tax, especially now, has gone down through COVID, and people aren't buying as much. But so they've been trying to get a hold of the education money for a long time to fund all kinds of things like roads. And where I think they really let us down, where I'll probably vote no. And I know, Jay, you've taken a position. I usually agree with UEA, and to some extent I agree. I might change my mind, but they just decided to fund education at a 6.5% on the WPU increase. That was huge. That money all goes primarily to salaries. But then when the revenue shortfall after the schools shut down and COVID hit, then they took that away. But yet they still gave $8 million to some online charter schools who had a very, very bad record of success. They had a record of failure for kids during the special session. So I just get so angry at the hypocrisy of Republicans, because when Jay said, well, we can't just throw money, that's what they say. They've said that, and my answer is always, we can't just throw money at education. Well, you've never tried, have you? And so we don't know. And they say, well, we have to have accountability. Then they started adding more and more standardized tests. You guys know that. It was all about testing, and schools got graded. So they never just say on the face of things, we respect teachers as professionals and administrators, and we think they will use the money well, because you don't get into the business of teaching unless you truly care about kids, right? You don't do it for the money. So I just think they've shown a lack of respect and trust for educators. And it just makes me angry, because they thought, well, we can use some of that money. Do you know who's going? See, this is the tricky part. It says it could also be used for disabled people, people with disabilities, and kids, right, Jay? Or is it
Yeah,
social
children,
services, children and people with
and
disabilities?
services for people
Well,
with disabilities.
how can you go out and campaign against that? Or you're just a monster. Oh, you don't like kids and disabled
They
people.
did.
Do you see what I mean? It's so.
They did pass a bill in one of the special sessions to pay back that 6% increase over time. As well.
Oh, they did. I didn't think they did the whole thing, but maybe they.
2011. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyway,
So
hopefully that
you know,
puts some
yeah.
answer to that question, Cameron.
Yeah.
I'm a skeptic.